Why didn't Buchanan do more to stop the Civil War? The president who watched the nation split, why didn't Buchanan do more to stop the Civil War? History remembers James Buchanan as the man who sat idle as the United States descended into chaos. A president whose inaction, hesitation, and misguided decisions helped pave the way for the bloodiest conflict in American history, the Civil War. But was it really just laziness or indifference that defined his presidency? Or was Buchanan trapped in a political, constitutional, and moral crisis so severe that even bold action may have failed? To understand Buchanan's inaction, we have to understand the man and the moment. A nation already fractured. By the time James Buchanan took office in March 1857, the United States was already on the brink of civil war. The North and South were locked in a bitter struggle over the expansion of slavery into new territories. The Missouri Compromise, the Compromise of 1850, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act had all tried and failed to create lasting peace. Violence had already broken out in Bleeding, Kansas. The Supreme Court's Dred Scott Decision, which came just 2 days after Buchanan's inauguration, only poured gasoline on the fire. The South demanded the right to take slavery anywhere. The North was increasingly unwilling to allow that. Buchanan, a lifelong Democrat from Pennsylvania who sympathized with the South, believed that the Constitution protected slavery, and that only the Supreme Court could settle the matter. He could not have been more wrong. Buchanan's belief in the law and its limits at the heart of Buchanan. His presidency was his almost obsessive belief in the Constitution and the law. He believed that secession was illegal, but that the federal government had no constitutional power to stop a state from seceding. In other words, he believed that what the southern states were doing was wrong. Shouldn't it be punished or prevented? But Buchanan saw himself as a neutral figure, a referee, not a fighter. His legalistic mindset made him cautious to the point of paralysis. He believed that if he just stayed calm, respected the Constitution, and avoided violence, things would eventually settle down. He misread the moment entirely. Too friendly to the South, many historians argue that Buchanan's inaction wasn't just about caution, it was about allegiance. Though he was from Pennsylvania, Buchanan surrounded himself with pro-Southern cabinet members and took actions that clearly favored the South. He supported the pro-slavery Lecompton Constitution in Kansas even after it was rejected by most settlers. He used federal power not to stop secession, but to help pro-slavery forces maintain control of key territories. This emboldened the South. Southern leaders saw Buchanan's weakness as a green light. If the president wouldn't stop them from spreading slavery, or even from leaving the Union, then what reason did they have to compromise? The election of 1860 and the collapse when Abraham Lincoln was elected in November 1860, Southern states began to secede almost immediately. South Carolina went first. Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas followed. And Buchanan, still in office for 4 more months, did almost nothing. He refused to recognize the Confederacy, but also refused to confront it militarily. His argument? The Constitution didn't give him the power to use force against the states. In a famous message to Congress, he wrote, "The Union is intended to be perpetual. But the power by force of arms to compel a state to remain in the Union was not among the powers delegated to the federal government. In other words, it's wrong for them to leave, but I can't stop them." This hands-off approach let the South organize, arm itself, and prepare for war, all while still occupying federal forts and arsenals in the South. Fort Sumter, the boiling point. Even as the Confederate States began seizing federal property, Buchanan remained passive. The most infamous example was Fort Sumter, in Charleston Harbor. The fort was still held by Union troops but was running out of supplies. Buchanan sent a ship, the Star of the West, to resupply it, but he did it quietly, without military escort. Southern forces fired on the ship, forcing it to retreat. Buchanan did nothing in response. This was a turning point. The South had fired on a U.S. ship. It was a clear act of rebellion, and the President of the United States let it pass without retaliation. The message was clear. The South could defy the Union without consequence. Legacy of inaction by the time Buchanan left office on March 4, 1861. 7 states had left the Union. The Confederacy was officially formed, and the country was teetering on the edge of war. Lincoln would inherit a crisis that Buchanan had allowed to fester, or perhaps helped create through his indecision. Historians rank Buchanan near the bottom of presidential rankings. Many blame him directly for the Civil War. His failure to act decisively when the U.S. was threatened is seen not as constitutional restraint, but as cowardice. And yet, some defenders argued that the situation was impossible. Political divisions were so deep, the Constitution so ambiguous, and the country so volatile that no president, even a strong one, could have stopped the war. Buchanan, in this view, was simply the wrong man at the worst possible time. Conclusion: a warning from the past. So why didn't Buchanan do more to stop the Civil War? Because he didn't believe it was his job, because he hoped the storm would pass, because he feared making things worse, and because he was unwilling to fight for a union that was already breaking apart. In many ways, Buchanan is a tragic figure, not because he was evil, but because he was weak. He placed process over principle, caution over courage, legality over leadership. And in the end, his passivity became a form of action, one that helped lead a divided nation straight into war. Thanks for watching.